And right now you can see actually that people are starting to move. There's been some chatting recently. It's for this right here. Welcome to my channel, Hey Girl in China. I've now been in China about 3 months now, and I was going to do my first video about a regular day-to-day living experience from Hong Kong versus mainland China, but since I have personally been affected by the Hong Kong protests and it's a hot topic Hong Kong wide, and also since I've been in China since the start to the kind of maybe dwindling down of the protest, I think it's important to discuss. But since this is not a channel about politics at all, in my second video, I will definitely be going over the regular fun stuff, day-to-day living between Hong Kong and mainland China. So look forward to it. All right, let's get started. Travel delays. So for anyone traveling to Hong Kong right now, just prepare to expect a bit of delays. There's going to be some disturbances if you go to high traffic areas. So if you're going into the metro station, or if you're going places where tourists are expected to be, you are probably going to get delayed by protesters who are probably going to be wearing all black. They're going to be in big crowds. They might be wearing an eye patch because that's one of the symbols for the protest. And you might just get caught in the jumble like this. Hi, we are here in East Cui, and as you can see, there's some type of riot going on. Everybody is actually wearing black, and I just happened to come in for the Hong Kong trip, and I didn't know this would be happening here. Yeah, so a lot of people coming out for this. I personally got caught in the jumble of this one day unintentionally, and you're just gonna be, if you're walking through a metro station that usually takes 5 minutes, not even 2 minutes to get out of the train and then go upstairs, you might spend 10 minutes to get out of the train and go upstairs. And then if you are in public areas, you're going to just have to expect that the inner security staff, maybe the ones that you would not see, they're probably going to be right in front. You're going to see a lot of like guards and all of the entry points, which is to be expected because they don't want to let people in, and they're trying to stop protesters before they come into their space and, you know, start things to get a rumbling. So it's not just happening in the metro stations, obviously. It's also happening in any of the large shopping areas. Again, anywhere where tourists might be. So any high traffic area in Hong Kong is where the tourists are going to go. And since Hong Kong, a lot of it is a bit crowded, and there is a lot of high traffic almost everywhere unless you're near the mountainous areas, pretty much anywhere is fair game for the protests to happen. And also, it's not like a tourist can just research where the next site of protest will be, so you just want to kind of prepare beforehand and make sure that you don't get caught up in the jumble if you do happen to get in this crowd of protesters. They might know that you're not a protester if you're not intending to be, but the police on hand or security staff also may not know. So just try to diverge and maybe just stay on the sides, far on the sides. Don't go in the same direction if you're just trying to travel through. So part of this protest also, it impacted flights as well. International flights in the Hong Kong International Airport. The airport was shut down for a bit. Rather, like some flights just couldn't go out because, well, actually, I'll tell you a little bit later why, because that's important to the whole of the protest and how it's been moving. Most importantly, if you're a traveler, um, just expect that when you go on the flight, you need to have your boarding pass beforehand, because right now they have like some extra security checks before you go in where you need to show your boarding pass and they kind of just inspect you. So that kind of caused some delay because it just takes time to go through that extra security check in addition to the security checks that they have in the Hong Kong airports right now already, regular airport security checks. Um, there is one upside to this that I've seen, and that's that I've seen if you have a flight, international flight going into Hong Kong, the ticket prices are a little bit cheaper, maybe just temporarily right now. I had a flight a little bit after the airport was shut down, like a couple, maybe a week after the airport was shut down, and my price was way cheaper than it probably usually would have been. And also I noticed that usually will not see a third of passengers gone from an international flight, but on the flight that I was on, they were gone. There might even be more than a third, but definitely there was a lot of vacant seats, and it could be because people canceled their tickets beforehand, or it could have just been that this particular flight just usually has a lot of vacancies. But in my head, when I saw this type of correlation on this type of international flight, it's not usually something that's common at all. So if you're traveling and you don't mind going into Hong Kong, this might be a plus for you. So let's get into the meat of this situation. Why the disturbances? So Hong Kong protesters, let me separate, they really just want to gain attention from the international communities, more and more of it, so that they cannot be shut down as easily. And like protesters anywhere else in the world would do, they're delaying roads and traffic and delaying people from going to work, which probably is not good for the economy, but protesters. They're delaying tourists and they're going into these national public areas. Some might be going a little bit overboard, but I'll get into that later. And it's really all just to gain attention in real life, physical person attention, in addition to trying to get online support. But online support might be a little bit harder, especially, you have internet trolls everywhere, and maybe everything that they put through won't go through. Um, but really, if they were not affecting people, then I probably wouldn't be posting this video right now. So the point is to gain attention, and they're getting it a little bit at least. So why the protesting? It all started with this Hong Kong resident he's a permanent resident, who was born in Shenzhen, mainland China. Just a fun fact. He murdered his girlfriend out of anger while they were on a trip to Taiwan as tourists. And then he proceeded to just take all her property and money to use it to pay off his debts, credit card debts, anything else, and buy anything that he needed. So obviously this is a big problem. But that crime was in Taiwan, not in Hong Kong. The man later came back to Hong Kong, but by that time, the police in Taiwan had already discovered the body and they had to put in the work to investigate it. So in Taiwan, he's wanted for murder, but in Hong Kong, he only can be judged for the kind of money laundering that he did, which will only give him 14 months, which he's mostly already served. He's been held in there for more than a year, or just about a year now. And he's going to be released in maybe the end of October if nothing gets solved out. The reason that Hong Kong can't just ship him over to Taiwan is basically because Hong Kong doesn't have any law that says that they can ship their criminals over to be trialed by another country. This is called extradition, and that's where this protest started, this extradition bill, because they made one. They started one that they wanted to be passed to get this man back over to Taiwan so he can be tried as a murderer and not just a money launderer. So originally the protests were supposed to just be anti-extradition protests, but it expanded a little bit, and what people called it expanded as well. So then it moved on to be called Hong Kong Independence Protest. Then some people called it Hong Kong Separatism from China Protest. Then some politicians and others called it the Hong Kong Riots. And then by some social media from mainland China, it was called the Hong Kong Sedition Protest or Hong Kong Sedition Riots. And then the Hong Kong Terrorism Riots. And you can kind of see that these names are becoming more and more criminal sounding. And the more criminal sounding that it gets, the worse it is for Hong Kong. So, before we go any further, I want to get into why these names are starting to sound increasingly more sinister. And I want to put a disclaimer out there that no nation on this earth, no country on this earth, is 100% a complete democracy. They all have some mix of socialism, democracy, and communism. And I think we all know, and it's pretty apparent, that China's People Republic is more on the communist end of that spectrum. They don't guarantee democracy or freedom of speech if it's deemed as going against government goals. And you can be imprisoned for saying something against the government or its leaders. This is called sedition. And that's why the Hong Kong protest also had the name of Hong Kong Sedition Riots, because it was deemed that they were going against some Chinese leaders that were elected and not going with the flow of government goals. And if you were to say something bad about the leaders, like how Americans do of Donald Trump, some Americans may do of Donald Trump, then you would probably get imprisoned. Most likely, if you said something bad about Xi Jinping, you would probably get imprisoned. But that is in mainland China, and Hong Kong is a bit different. I'll explain why it's a little bit different again later. So there are many mainland Chinese people who maybe have gone to visit or have become residents in Hong Kong. And by normal Hong Kong standards, if they should have free speech and expression and they won't have committed any crimes, but in mainland China, they definitely will have committed some crimes. And in Hong Kong, there's also just regular Hong Kongers who may do that. And what they're really afraid of is that this law will also allow China to get some of those people who have spoken against China or done anything else that's against China's laws and just ship them over to China's prisons. So that's a real cause of fear for them, and one of the main reasons of the protest. They don't want that type of connection to be there. I mean, they also already had some rumors of secret police coming from mainland China and shipping people back from Hong Kong back to mainland China. But if this law came to pass, then this would just be apparent. There would be no rumors. This would be an actuality that everybody just saw. And they also see, the protesters and other Hong Kongers may just see this law as just another point in Hong Kong's great leap forward of getting their goal of whole control for Hong Kong. And that scares many of them. But that technically China does have legal control in some sense of Hong Kong, and I'll get into that again later. For right now, Hong Kong Hong Kongers may think that China will swallow them whole, because right now China's already a big part in the voting electorate, in the voting process. Basically, Hong Kongers may be upset that regardless of how they are voting at the upper level of nominations, the candidate that mainland China or Beijing, pro Beijing, um, chooses seems to always be the one that gets elected, because there are many pro Beijing Chinese leaders that are already in power as politicians in Hong Kong, and that's also where the current chairperson, the current president in Hong Kong, came from, because she was voted in that way. She's what the pro Beijingers supported. She's that politician. So there's some worries about that. So the protest has really just become something that Hong Kongers or protesters from Hong Kong may see as going against mainland China, getting involved in Hong Kong matters, Hong Kong politics, um, Hong Kong's autonomy, Hong Kong's freedom. So that's where the independence kind of name came from, in the Hong Kong independence protests. And since the police have now gotten involved as well in some heavy anti-protest tactics, the protests also kind of evolved to see that the police are not to be trusted, um, causing like some public affairs issues with the police as far as just rumors. The protesters already had rumors that the police had violence and corruption within their ranks, and that there was some deals made with triads and gangs. So there's been, one of their demands is for an inspection of the police. Um, Really, this is not a good matter in the long term for the police, because even after these protests, there's really just going to be some issues with the public not trusting them. So some mainlanders' real issue with the Hong Kong protests really is just that they don't like these attention seeking tactics from the international communities. It's going to cause people to take a look. And China does not want everybody in its business. They've urged for the protests to stop because they just don't want that type of disturbances happening. And also, they look down on the way that the protesters are going against the police force, and they're supporting the police force. Um, they also don't want the news from the protest to disturb any good news that they have coming out from mainland China, you know. So there's only so much space in news broadcasting. We can only say so much, and they want it to be about their good things, not Hong Kong's bad things. So why did it really escalate? Um, Well, at first, mainland China, the news outlets, they really didn't pay much attention at all to the protest. The mainlanders didn't pay attention either. Really, just the news outlets completely deflated it at first. Then the protests have been happening now for the whole summer. It's been 3 months, and also the number of people in the protest has grown. If you watch that video I showed you earlier, that's already a lot of people. I mean, I have some more videos on that as well. There was a lot of people when I was in East Simsui, and I saw the protesters just crowding the streets. So as these demonstrations are just lasting for a long time, obviously China's going to get more worried about the size of it, and obviously Hong Kong is worried too, the politicians there. So Hong Kong politicians, their response was to get the police involved. When they got the police involved, it started escalating more and more. The protesters got angry because the police used tear gas, batons, rubber bullets, which are not as lethal, but if they do get into one of your sensitive areas or strike you the wrong way, they can still kill. But so far, there have been no deaths from those rubber bullets. There's been some injuries, including one medic got her eye shot. It was ruptured, it was shot out by a police, or this is what the media says. And that is why the symbol of the eye patch came, to just represent that medic that from police brutality had this problem. And then with the police getting involved and all of these methods being used, including throwing the tear gas into the subway stations where there's no good ventilation, it really just caused the protesters to just get more and more angry. And then there were suicides that happened that were connected to the protest, and where people actually wrote, "Don't give up, don't let the police make you give in." It just added to the protesters' fuel, so it started to get more and more intense. Consequently, as the protests became more and more intense, the protesters started to get violent with the police. They started to vandalize the national buildings. They also got some laser pointers and pointed it at the police building, the non-harmful ones, but still just acts of ways to vandalize. And also some protesters got some handheld weapons to go against it. Then later on, and this is where we get into the troubles with the Hong Kong International Airport, because the protesters went in there just to hand out some flyers to travelers, but then there were two mainland Chinese spies, and they apprehended them. They took hold of them and held them for a while. And this caused the flight delays and the shutdowns, and it caused the increase in airport security, and caused the in the departure section why you have to go through that extra security section, and it also caused the boarding pass issue where you have to get your boarding pass before you go into the airport territory. So this has really angered mainland China, because once you start getting into airports, that's international territory, but not in the right way. And it's made mainland Chinese kind of feel like Hong Kong will make them lose their face or lose their reputation on an international front. Mm-mm, not, that is definitely not okay. So some have even called it terrorism, and they have spoken out. And I actually believe this too, that China is ready to deploy their ranks on any moment of terrorism. They have specialized forces just for anti riots. And Shenzhen is right bordering Hong Kong. They could literally just go over, and this would be the situation that would allow them to do so. Um, some protesters got angry from this because the if they were to destroy or vandalize government property, international areas where they are going to be able to get attention from the international communities, then doing it this way would not help them. It would not support their cause. It would undermine it. So, what they have thought is that if something like this happened, then there's probably some paid provocateurs, some people who were paid to kind of make this happen so that it would take away their support, and basically just setting them up. Let me tell you why this starts going more and more internationally, where I've actually seen it. Some Hong Kongers have met some anti-Hong Kong protest movements from outside of China. For example, in Australia, where in the schools, some protesters or supporters um, met some issues from some mainland Chinese anti-protesters. Um, Hong Kongers in this case have more and more so reached out to Western international communities like the United States of America, which is urged publicly for peace on all sides, especially in light of the fact of the many, many foreign businesses and investments that are stored in Hong Kong, since Hong Kong's a kind of medium in between the rest of Asia. Um, they the US doesn't want any problems to happen in Hong Kong. And really, there could be some terrible situations and trade tensions if there's involvement from either the US or the People's Republic of China. Um, I mean, when I was abroad during this period and I came back in through the international Hong Kong airport, before that, I saw that there were some drops in renminbi, RMB, and or the Chinese yuan and the US dollar. The actual value had dropped in exchange communities during that time. So this is really affecting um, all sides. So at this point, some of you may be confused if you don't know that much history about Hong Kong and China, because aren't they the same thing? Why would the people be going against each other? Why would there be separate sides? So let me explain. So 200 years ago, approximately, Great Britain was expanding to get Asian colonies. This included Hong Kong. So they started the Opium War by smuggling drugs in and kind of just pushing it throughout to get control of Hong Kong by making people lose their minds. Basically, just causing a lot of disruption and chaos by people not being in their right state of mind to actually run Hong Kong. And China tried to go against this, but eventually they lost out in the Opium War. So since China lost against the British forces for the Opium War, it basically just leased out Hong Kong until 1997. And during this time, there was a lot more Western influence than Eastern mainland Chinese influence, since the British had Hong Kong. And also, the Westerners just had more power to block Chinese in Hong Kong from getting high power political positions and good jobs. They were probably paid less and treated less important than Westerners, especially if the British are in Hong Kong and they want to keep controlling it. They would probably try to stop any Hong Kongers from rising up so that they could overthrow them. However, about 20 years after World War II and 30 years before their lease was up, they realized, China can take back Hong Kong at any time. They've gotten a bit stronger, and we don't have so many colonies or any type of troops or forces to protect Hong Kong if they decide to take it back. So they changed their tactics a bit. They decided to make a local culture inside of Hong Kong and create gatherings. They upped their government power usage on public spending, healthcare, just making Hong Kong look nice and infrastructure, and basically just anything else that they could think of to kind of gain their reputation back with the Hong Kongers and make an independent culture, because before Hong Kong, people were mostly just all travelers coming in and out, and they really wanted to solidify, this is Hong Kong, this is our area, and create that local identity. Their meaning was really just so that even if mainland China is able to take back Hong Kong, that they want to make it so that the Hong Kongers look favorably, look well upon the British and the time of their colonial rule, so that maybe they can keep continuing it, or at the very least that the that Hong Kong will just be so different from mainland China in all of its functionings and the government, that it will need Britain still to help run it, because it won't be able to function on its own. And this is where the two systems, one country came from. That's why there's a little bit of difference from Hong Kong and mainland China, because actually the British succeeded in a bit, because they made it so that Hong Kong was different and used to functioning a certain way away from mainland China. So this two systems two systems function made it so that Hong Kong could keep a little bit of its freedom, autonomy, the way it was running currently, and some of its capitalism. But in 50 years, China would just take full control. That would be by 2047. So it's important to note that China could have taken Hong Kong back faster from the British even before the lease, but they waited to have good relations internationally with Britain, and also just because they benefited in some way from having Hong Kong be a medium from foreign investments and using its way of capitalism. And there was really just no need to change Hong Kong. Um, but with China's current use of state capitalism and its prominence right now, it probably doesn't need the medium of Hong Kong for foreign investments. And also, since the um, two systems, one nation ideology was only supposed to last for 50 years, by 2047 it will be up, and it will be expected that Hong Kong and China will be complete unified. And if they are completely unified, the sum, because Hong Kong still has not gotten all, but some of the current autonomy and that it has gotten from this two systems, one nation plan will go, and it will just be with mainland China. Right now, mainland China uses Putonghua, which uses the simplified system. They don't speak Cantonese. So there will be a lot of changes once that rolls into play that you can just expect. In Macau, for example, they still use some traditional Chinese, but they're pushing more simplified Chinese and Putonghua, which is the standardized Chinese. And that will be expected in Hong Kong as well once they become completely unified. Right now, if you go into Hong Kong and you speak Mandarin, standardized Mandarin, probably you maybe have 1 out of 3 people understand you, but it won't be like that in the future when everything is completely unified. So, what has happened recently? Well, the bill was finally withdrawn, the original bill, but that means that the murderer could possibly have gone loose. I haven't had any news updates lately as to what's going to happen with that murderer who Taiwan wants. But the protests have not stopped, because now the protests have just evolved to so much more than the original bill. It's just not that anymore. Now, the protesters have 4 additional demands that they started as the protests went on, including to have the police inspected, as they have lost public trust on their terms. So, where do I stand? Well, I can only say that I'm not going to be living in either country permanently, so I don't really think it's my place to speak for Hong Kong or mainland China. I really only hope that no lives are taken away in the matter of this protest, that businesses, jobs, and the economy can flourish in Hong Kong, so that basically nobody loses their investments, whether just the regular people or international people who are investing. And also just that Hong Kong can continue to contribute great minds and great talents without injuries from any of this rumbling that's going on. And I deeply, deeply think that if the goal of the Hong Kong protest is to get China to stop its quick motion into controlling Hong Kong matters, then peaceful demonstration and pressure on politicians is the way. But any kind of big disruptions will definitely just push mainland China faster into Hong Kong to take control. Okay, so thanks for watching. And if you're looking for more of a day-to-day Hong Kong versus mainland China traveling, not so much politics, kind of video, then definitely look forward to my second video, which I will get into for sure. And also, if you have anything that you want me to talk about regarding China or just anything in general, I will definitely like to get into it. Just comment below and don't forget to subscribe so that I know I have your support. Besides that, again, thank you for watching, and Hey Girl in China, signing off.